Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. We'll just give it a few moments while people join. And while we do that, I'll introduce myself. I'm Geneviève Bonnet, Executive Senior Advisor to Digital, and I'll be your host for today. It is my pleasure to welcome you to Inside the Prime Ecosystem, the third webinar in Digital's Defense Market Access series. We're especially pleased to be co-hosting today's session with Strix, Canada's driving force in shaping the future of aerospace and defense. Bringing Strix network along Digitals is exactly the kind of collaboration this series was built for, and it shapes the conversation that you'll hear today. Digital is Canada's global innovation cluster for digital technology. We bring together industry, post-secondary institution, and the public sector to solve major challenges with advanced technology through collaboration and co-investment. And our focus is on helping Canadian innovation move beyond great ideas into real adoption at scale. To date, we've funded more than 200 projects across the country worth around $900 million. Strix is a not-for-profit organization dedicated to promoting innovation and collaborative research in the Canadian aerospace industry and related sectors. Strix aims to position Canada as the global leader in aerospace and defense innovation by fostering multi-sectoral collaboration and access to resources, driving sustainable development and integration of technologies and platforms of the future. Digital is headquartered in Vancouver, British Columbia, and we respectfully acknowledge that our work takes place on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. As pan-Canadian organizations, Digital and Strix also operate on the ancestral and unceded territories of the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people who share and steward these lands, and we are grateful to be doing this work here. Canada's defense industrial strategy and the major new investment behind it marks a real shift in how Canada will build, partner, and buy to strengthen national security, sovereignty, and domestic capacity. That has opened a genuine window for commercial and dual use innovators. And it's a path most Canadian companies have never had reason to walk before. As the national navigator for digital technology companies, that's what prompted Digital to build this series. We started with getting in the door, how the market works, and where the entry points are. Then we did speaking defense, how to position your technology around a capability a buyer actually needs. And both recordings are available, and I'd encourage you to go back to them. Today, we go one layer deeper into the prime ecosystem itself, how relationship with primes actually get built, how the industrial and technological benefits policy creates opportunities for Canadian companies, and what the Canadian content window means for you. Two sessions will follow, and they'll be around how many moves, and funding and procurement mechanisms, and partnerships and IP on building alliances while protecting what you own. And the series is in the end of it. Selected participants might be invited to closed invitation-only defense showcases with buyers and primes that we are planning for the fall. Stay tuned for more details as they become available. 3 quick notes before we start. So this session is being recorded, and the recordings will be shared with everyone after the webinar. And if a question comes to you at any point, please put it in the chat. We'll bring as many as we can into the Q&A at the end. But we are looking forward to a candid and constructive discussion. And to ensure that we can bring all of these perspectives together effectively, we'll be moderating the Q&A session, and ask that comments and questions posted in the chat remain respectful and focus on advancing the conversation. So based on what you told us at registration, here's a quick read of the room. We have 452 registrations for today. And 59% of you are companies with technology, product, or services in the market or in development, and 54% are under 2 million in revenue, including pre-revenue. And it's a genuinely national room, and It skews early. Most of you are still coping whether defense applies to you at all. That's exactly the right place to be sitting today. Now, on the left, you can see you're offering the entire spectrum: services, software, hardware, physical products, and integrated systems. And there's no single profile in this room. And on the right is the number that shaped today's agenda. So 56% of you have no contact with a prime at all, and another few of you are in the introductory stage. So for well over two-thirds of this room, the question isn't how to manage a prime relationship, it's how to start one. And that's what our guest speaker and our panel are here to unpack today. Now, before we go to the panel, we're very pleased to have a guest speaker with us to set the foundation. Camila Grove is a policy analyst with the Industrial and Technological Benefits sector at the Defense Investment Agency. She joined the ITB sector in 2020 as a project manager on major Navy and Coast Guard procurements, primarily contracts under the National Shipbuilding Strategy, developing ITB value proposition requirement, and reviewing and approving the transactions submitted by primes. Since 2024, our focus has shifted to strategy policy, the ongoing review and modernization of the ITB policy itself, including new and enhanced eligible transaction types. So Camila brings both sides of this: how the policy is written and how it actually gets applied. Given how much of this room is at the very start of the prime conversation, that's the ideal place for us to begin. So, Camila, over to you.
Thank you, Jen, for the wonderful introduction. And also thank you to Digital and Strix, the Digital and Strix teams, for the invitation to speak with you all today. I'm excited to be here to be part of this discussion and to help set the context for the panel. As we are all aware, Canada has signaled a generational increase in defense spending to support our Canadian Armed Forces. And with that comes a push to modernize our policies and processes to really meet the moment. So with that, I would also like to thank the audience for taking the time to be here today. The defense landscape is complex and can be difficult to navigate. So I'm hopeful that this session will help demystify some of the processes and policies that you may encounter as you navigate this space, and especially as you start to engage in conversations with the prime contractors responsible for meeting these policy requirements. So I'm joining you today as a policy analyst with the Defense Investment Agency. As some of you may know, it was announced in October 2025 that the DIA would come into fruition and be responsible for defense procurement specifically. So we are consolidating a lot of defense procurement authorities and practices and processes within one agency rather than splitting them between multiple government departments. So the DIA, or Defense Investment Agency, is currently operating as a special operating agency under Public Services and Procurement Canada and reports to a CAEO and the Secretary of State for Defense, Stephen Fuhr. The DIA's goal is to modernize, simplify, and make defense procurement more efficient, ensuring faster delivery without compromising accountability. So to do this, the government intends to expand contracting authorities and introduce greater autonomy for the agency so that it can deliver high priority defense procurements faster, test new procurement approaches, such as through our build, partner, buy that was announced in the Defense Industrial Strategy, and the approach is being developed and kind of communicated as we go, and also to strengthen Canadian industrial innovation and partnerships, such as strategic partnerships, but also through the ITB policy. So most recently, to support these goals, the DIA assumed responsibility for the Industrial and Technological Benefits, or ITB policy, which was previously run out of ISED, or Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada. As the ITB policy is Canada's main tool to leverage defense procurements for economic benefits, many of you will have heard of it in passing. Some of you may already be involved in an ITB transaction or business activity. Some of you may have never heard of it at all. So as a quick overview, I'll just go over kind of some key points. So the ITB policy is applied to eligible defense procurements and requires the contractor to undertake business activity in Canada equal to the value of the contract it has won. This is an important point because the It is a policy, not a program. So the DIA itself is not distributing funding through the ITB policy. The responsibility lies on the prime contractor responsible for delivering that contract to undertake business activity in Canada. That could be through hiring Canadian labor, hiring Canadian suppliers, investing in research and development in Canada. There are a variety of activities that they could be pursuing to meet that obligation. So when the ITB policy is applied to an eligible procurement, our ITB team develops detailed economic benefit requirements tailored to that procurement, called the ITB value proposition. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. A lot of our procurements are in different domains. They're competitive, they're sole source, they're foreign military sales. There are a bunch of different approaches that influence how we apply the ITB policy. At its core, the foundational element will always remain the same, that requirement to undertake business activity equal to the contract. But we can kind of tailor our commitments and our requirements based on how much work can be done in Canada and how to incentivize more work here in Canada on delivering the good or service being procured, or operations into global supply chains, or investing in research and development in Canada. Next slide, please. So as we know, Canada is strengthening its economic resilience while making a generational increase in defense spending to meet NATO commitments. That scale of investment creates a real opportunity to ensure defense dollars deliver strategic long-term benefits for Canada. Modernizing the ITB policy is one of those opportunities. So as a response to the defense industrial strategy, this increase in defense spending, our team has developed several updates to the ITB policy, which were announced by Prime Minister Carney in May 2026 at CANSEC here in Ottawa. They're intended to adapt to this changing moment. So the objective is to keep Canada's defense industrial base competitive, resilient, and aligned with national priorities. And that involves also this transfer of the ITB policy into the Defense Investment Agency to really streamline procurement, but also tie together and align all of our defense priorities and industrial priorities that go alongside with it. Next slide, please. So I'll provide a bit of a summary of some of these ITB policy changes because I think they will come up in the panel discussion, and I think this is something that's very relevant to the moment today. So at its core, again, there's no change to our policy fundamentals. Contractors must still deliver business activity equal to 100% of the contract value. But there are a few different kind of features that we introduced through the ITB modernization. First, we introduced a new strategic investment transaction to motivate investments that build Canada's defense industrial base. So these are investments that are aligned with the priority areas identified in the defense industrial strategy and which seek to establish or expand industrial capacity here in Canada. Eligible investments under this transaction type would also be eligible to receive up to a 5 times multiplier. This means that for every dollar invested towards this activity, the company making the investment would receive $5 in credit towards their ITB obligation. So there's a real incentive there to increase that industrial capacity, which is a major goal of the defense industrial strategy and this move towards defense spending that still benefits a sovereign defense industrial base. Another change we made was the introduction of a new Canadian company boost to better incentivize direct work in Canada. So direct work in Canada, under our definition, is work that directly supports the good or the service being procured by Canada. So in this case, where a recipient company, so a Canadian supplier, has a Canadian content value of 70% or higher, which is essentially our score or measurement of how much of a product or service is Canadian in origin, including Canadian labor, Canadian materials, profit taxable in Canada, things like that. So if your Canadian content value is 70% or higher, we would boost that measurement to 100%. So it's a real dollar to dollar exchange on the credit towards an ITB obligation. Additionally, if that supplier is a small, medium business, so 250 employees or under our definition, that activity will now be eligible for a 2 times multiplier as well. So getting a double return on that investment. This is intended to help incentivize increased participation of Canadian suppliers on Canadian procurements where there is an ITB obligation. Another introduction or update that we had was the enhancement of SMB tools to accelerate potential for small medium businesses to scale up. So we updated our small medium business definition. Once again, it's 250 or fewer full-time employees, which is a little different from other government programs. So if you are kind of navigating the government grants and contribution space, EDC, BDC programs, be sure to double check how your company qualifies under those definitions. But we updated our small and medium business definition and introduced a small middle capitalization or small mid cap definition. The introduction of this small mid cap category is to allow for companies that are in the process of scaling up to continue to benefit from the enhanced crediting features received when you qualify as a small medium business. So a small mid cap can now benefit from these features for a period of 5 years following their growth to over 250 full-time employees. Another update was the increased incentives for workforce development to advance workforce and skills development for the defense sector here in Canada. So we introduced a 5 times multiplier on investments in skills development and training, and increased our existing multiplier for skills development and training with Indigenous peoples or Indigenous controlled institutions to a 10 times multiplier. Again, these multipliers kind of highlight what Canada's priorities are and where we want to incentivize greater action and investment by these large primes. Finally, the last one I'll kind of focus on is the alignment of key industrial capabilities to sovereign capabilities. So the Government of Canada announced that the sovereign capabilities would be kind of a major focus for national defense moving forward under the Defense Industrial Strategy. To better align with national defense needs and their priorities, we will actually be retiring our current key industrial capabilities and adopting the sovereign capabilities on future procurements. So this will help us really align with the definitions of what does national defense need today, tomorrow, in 10 years. And that's how we're going to kind of incentivize or operationalize through the ITB policy, these sovereign capabilities. We also made a few additional administrative changes, but I'll leave it there for now, and we'll kind of move into the panel discussion. If we move to the next slide, you'll also find our contact information at the Defense Investment Agency, the ITB team specifically. If you do have any follow-up questions, of course, there's the panel discussion and potential Q&A as well through the chat, but I would be happy to answer questions by email post-session as well. So I'll pass it back to Jen there. Thank you.
Camilla, thank you. That's the clearest possible foundation for the conversation we're about to have. Because policy is one thing, and what happens in the room when a Canadian SME meets a prime is another. That's where our panel comes in today. And we've deliberately assembled people who sit on different sides of that table. So let me make some introduction for our panel. So Camilla, who you've just heard from, will stay with us on the panel. Thank you. And Carol Kaz is head of offsets and industrial cooperation for BAE Systems in Canada, and an active member of the Industrial Participation Association of Canada. She has more than 15 years of experience across defense, aerospace, energy, infrastructure, and before BAE, she held industrial cooperation and contract management roles at CAE, Hydro-Quebec, Andritz Hydro, Siemens, and Naval Group. We also have Jeff LaFrance, who is co-founder and CEO of BizWork, a Canadian company building dual-use decision support operations and training solution using AI, immersive reality, and complex data visualization. Jeff has 30 years of experience in technology commercialization and has built strategic collaborations with defense and aerospace primes, government, and research organizations. He also serves as the vice chair of Alberta Aviation, Aerospace, and Defense. He is, in other words, the person in this panel that has been where most of you are sitting today. And then we have Tariq Abdelatif, who is the founder and managing director of Arctech Accelerate, with over a decade in defense procurement and ITB policy. He specializes in helping high-growth SMEs position themselves with global defense supply chain by translating procurement policy, ITB obligation, and defense industrial strategy into practical partnerships and transaction opportunity. And then we have Nate Pitt, who's the regional leader, offset and industrial cooperation Canada as CAE, where he manages the company's IRB and ITB obligations. Before CAE, Nathaniel spent 4 years at an ITB project manager at Innovation Science and Economic Development Canada, working on major capital projects, including future aircrew training and the land vehicle crew training system. And then, last but not least, moderating our discussion today is Walter Chan, who's the Chief Strategy and Business Officer at Strix and our co-host today. And Walter is an aerospace and defense executive with 20 years spanning engineering, manufacturing, MRO, certification, business development, and corporate strategy. So critically for today, he has completed the ITB transaction for both the recipient and the obliger side. So he understands what each party is trying to achieve and where these partnerships succeed or fall apart. So Walter, over to you.
Thanks, Jen. Thank you for those great introductions. I think we're very lucky to have such a great cross-section of panelists who have worn SME hats, who have worked in government or primes. So the audience is really going to get a lot of information out of the group today. I'm going to kick it off because the audience is so SME focused. Let's flip the switch and see from an ITB manager perspective. So this is more for like Carol and Nate as ITB managers for your organizations. What are some of the things that you hear on a day-to-day basis that kind of make you cringe when you get approached by an SME? I'll let one of you take it off from there.
Well, that's a tough one, Nate. We probably have the same experience, but let's share a bit of our. I think the one important part for SMB to understand is that we're both, and all of the ITB managers you're going to meet with, we're part of large organization of 10,000, 30,000, 50,000, 100,000 employee. And most of us are not engineers or are not specialized in what you're expert in. So approaching us sometimes with buzzwords. Oh, we do AI software. It's like, yeah, okay, but that's not going to help me understand what you can bring as a solution to my company based on the product we have for sale in our product line and who I should introduce you to. So somehow we're a matchmaker, right? And we need your help. And we need your help, not because we're dumb, just because we cannot know everything that our company does. So sometimes I have people telling me, and maybe that helps you too, and they say, we do this, and our product is usually of help in people in combat system management for naval ships, or for people doing visual display system in aircraft that are fighters. I'm like, okay, just that note will help me match you with someone in the right division in my company. Because there is no way I can know where your product, your sensor, your technology fits into defense equipment. So that would be one for me. I don't know, Nate, if you have others like.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And sometimes just knowing where you are in the value chain, right? You may not be a direct subcontractor to us. You may be a subcontractor to a subcontractor of ours. So understanding basically what we do, how the company you're pitching to is vertically integrated or not. Where I work, we're very much vertically integrated. So, that's, you may not know this, but just interacting with us, you'll be able to get a sense of that. And then oftentimes I get told we can do a 20x or a 25x or something that doesn't exist. It's not obviously the IT policy is complicated. It's not always accessible to everyone, but knowing it at a rudimentary level, understanding the different multipliers at play can allow you to slot in and have a more educated discussion and appeal to the ONIC manager, to the offset manager in the right capacity so that they can align both the technical offering that you bring and then potentially the multiplier also that is aligned with that.
Fully support what you just said.
Yeah. Terry, I saw you nodding your head when Carol was talking. What is something you've seen with your clients to help bridge that gap between they have an awesome product or service and you kind of that liaison with the primes because you kind of know what they're going through?
Yeah, no, I definitely I smile just because I did cringe at several of those things that Nate and Carol mentioned as well. But what I find is when an SME or an SMB rather, from the context of the ITB policy, approaches a prime, getting the ITB manager and getting the business interested are usually two very different things. Because you may ultimately need alignment across, the program team, engineering, supply chain, procurement, and as well as the ITB. So that's why, finding the ITB contact a lot of the time simply is not enough. So to kind of simplify things for our clients, we always say, before contacting the prime, you should be able to answer, first of all, why this prime, why this program, what problem do I solve, who internally would care, and why does doing this with a Canadian company create, additional value? So I say usually like 10 generic prime introductions are worth less than one conversation where you've actually done the homework and know who to talk to and know what problem you're solving.
Yeah, I'll piggyback on that 2 seconds. There's yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. There's two ways that we get approached. Either someone approaches our technical experts or someone within the business that is not offsets, or they approach us. And then they rely on us to be that opening door to other stakeholders. And depending on who you talk to, some will take that mission very at heart and will disseminate your corporate presentations to the relevant parties internally. We'll follow up with them to get an answer, because I'll be very honest with you, 99% of the time you send internally, you will not hear back from them unless you proactively request follow-ups. And we get pinged. I must get 100 emails per year, and CanSec, I must get 50 business cards at least. So we get inundated by this. The ones that succeed are the ones, the suppliers that go through us sometimes, but also not only go through us, ask for every 2-3 weeks, they pester us. And unfortunately that works because then we want them to go away sometimes and stop pestering us. So we actually make the time every day to solicit the right people internally. And then what we do is we usually send a presentation to that person once we find that person. Hence why, going back to Carol, the essential critical element is creating a bespoke presentation that clearly outlines what you do. I can't stress this enough. I had that point as well on my side. Buzzwords, avoid them if possible, but really state what your company does. It seems easy enough to say, but for some reasons or another, it's a bit more challenging to actually do. So if you do that, we can send that presentation over, and then the subject matter expert on our side can actually evaluate and assess the fit within our technology without having to meet with that supplier. So that's what I would focus on as well.
Okay, Jeff, you're an SME that is in the digital ecosystem and the aerospace ecosystem, but this isn't your first rodeo. What did you do at the beginning? Were you the one that was pestering the Nates and the Carols, or what was your approach to getting into the defense market at the beginning as an entrepreneur?
So yes, we certainly, and Nate and I have talked quite a bit in the past. So yes, absolutely, that is a path. One of the things I would say, and we made this mistake early, and coach people probably not to make this mistake. Coming to an ITB manager or just somebody with an organization saying, "Hey, we're a small business, give us some offsets." That's a stop of conversation right at that point, because it means you do not understand at all what's going on within the marketplace. You're not mature enough to be talking with the people you're talking with. So, Tarek said it very well, do your research, understand the organization, understand where what you do fits into the organizational priorities, how it's going to benefit that organization, because ITBs are not a pot of money sitting there to be spent. It's an obligation that the company is going to try to leverage to the best benefit of that organization itself. And so they're looking to invest to benefit themselves as well as to benefit the small business. And so you need to know how that alignment works as a small business and do a lot of that pre-work, that pre-research in order to be effective at those conversations. And so, Nate, I'm sure you and I, when we first talked, I probably wasn't as mature as I was later on in the conversations, But this is a learning exercise as you learn the organization, as you learn the people, as you learn the way it works. And as a small business, it's really dependent upon you to drive that. There is way too many priorities on the business itself that you're dealing with at the prime level. So the small business has to drive that relationship very strongly.
Right, bang on, Jeff. And just to kind of like put a little bow to that, like, because we see it every day here, one of the biggest mistakes we see with SMEs, they go to primes and they open with, you're a prime, you have ITB obligations, and we're Canadian. That's not going to be a business case. So
No.
lead with the problem you solve. And ITB should make an already good transaction more attractive. It's not what you're going to lead with.
It's the win-win-win-win that gets suppliers through the door. And it's not just two wins, not just a win for ITBs and a win for the supplier. It's a win from a technology perspective, reduces cost, reduces risk. I see suppliers really in two camps. One of them is you deliver a widget, something tangible, which is supply chain related. And in this case, we already have most likely a supplier that does that for us, or we wouldn't be successful in business. So what you're offering in a lot of cases, unless that supplier is either late, overpriced, we have a difficult relationship with that, which is kind of the unicorn situation. If you want to get into that supply chain, you have to dislodge someone else that is working for us. That's an uphill battle. You need to really sharpen your value prop and your business case because, and that's maybe something you may not be aware of, qualifying a new supplier into large OEM's supply chain is like pulling teeth. It is excruciatingly complicated, time consuming, and costly. The start of the business relationship starts at, hey, I can offer you this. Let's say a purchaser in the procurement group likes what you're offering and likes the price point, initial price point. Well, then you got to negotiate T's and C's. If there's IP clauses because of whatever, there needs to be a bit of customization for that product to make it fit for purpose. You need to negotiate that. Then you need to do a quality assurance. That means that physically teams from our head office will have to travel to your location, TNL for 2 nights. That's a cost. Who pays that? That's another part of the business case. Then first articles inspection, and then finally, maybe a year after, you'll get a PO if all the stars aligned and you're still there. So it is, you can't underestimate that level of internal cost. It's not easy just to get in on it as a qualified supplier. It takes sometimes years.
It's the same reverse for you, all of the SMBs listening to this. It's going to be extremely, and we cannot highlight it enough. And we understand your pain and we understand the challenge. We cannot ease it. Onboarding with a large corporation is the most painful thing you will do, even above filing your tax, okay? So you will fill paperwork to a level that you've never seen in your life, especially if you talk, and I'm not going to blame any company, but the Lockheed, the Boeing, the BAE of this world, large corporation have an extreme level of paperwork and red tape that will make it also a very long and costly process on your end to embark on that process. And I'm sure Jeff seen that with companies he worked for that, we had an initial discussion 2 years ago, took 3 months to do an NDA, took another 3 months to discuss the scope, another year to onboard as an approved supplier. Be aware of that. Be aware of the lengthy defense procurement project where we might engage with you and we might get a contract in 3 years. It's hard for an SMB, and we know that. It's hard in terms of cash flow. It's hard in terms of resource filling papers because you're sometimes just a 2-man business or a 3, I'm using the word men, but I mean men and women business. And you're like, whoa, I don't have the time to fill all the forms that Carol is sending me over. But this is the journey you're embarking on. There is potential benefit at the end, but the tunnel is not easy that you're going to go through. And be aware of that when you want to enter the defense market. And we know it, and there is limited action we can have to ease that, right?
But once you're in,
we're not doing a great job of encouraging our Canadian innovators to get into
No, but sorry. I'm telling them about what's bad. There was a lot of good. There was a lot of good we can tell them about.
All we've been talking about here, what we've been talking about is pertaining to becoming part of the supply chain as a direct offset to building up whatever defense procurement contract you will have won. There are other types of transactions that SMEs can do. They're more on the strategic level. They are possibly just as long-term, possibly just as much paperwork, but there is some organic relationships that happen when an SMB and a prime collaborate on research together, for instance, or if a prime invests in an SMB's technology because it's going to help, make their supply chain more resilient in the future. So maybe we can talk about less the direct transactions that the modernization policy should incentivize you guys to do more of and pick some of those Canadian SMEs, even though you might have some foreign suppliers for that. But let's talk about consortiums and investment frameworks as types of transactions. Maybe Tarek, what's your experience with those, and what would you say to some of the SMEs in the audience?
Great question. To that, I'd say, the SMEs here, they don't need to memorize every single ITB mechanism there is out there. They need to understand which mechanisms change the economics of working with their company to a prime. So what that means is, Canadian company incentives, enhanced SME tools, future sales, strategic investments, R&D pathways, and several other ones that align with the sovereign capabilities. But the important shift for SMEs is that the conversation doesn't need to have to start with, buy my product for this Canadian platform. There could be other ways of building that relationship. Getting that direct transaction can oftentimes be the most difficult one. So there's, the direct versus indirect transactions. So I'd say don't assume if your technology isn't physically going into an aircraft or a ship or a vehicle that there isn't an ITB opportunity. There's R&D transactions for AI, software, cybersecurity, testing, training, other opportunities that could be an easier pathway to get into those supply chains or to get working with primes. So I'd say don't just position yourself as a Canadian vendor, position yourself as a Canadian capability instead, or a future capability.
We've been using SME and SMB interchangeably throughout this panel, but it's not the same thing.
Yes, let me clarify that. Not all SMEs are SMBs, but all SMBs are SMEs. From the context of the, as you see most grant programs, like 500 or less FTEs, you're able to access it because you're an SME. For ITB policy to be able to leverage the tools under the ITB policy, like the multipliers, it's 250 or less FTEs constitute an SMB. So I think that's a pretty important distinction.
Yes.
Yeah. So I wanted to, and I think Jeff was probably in that case in his position. I think for ITB managers, we try to maximize the Canadian content on the program. There is a point where you cannot Canadianize whatever you have to deliver more. Example, the engines on a ship comes from Rolls-Royce UK. There is no one that can do those engines in Canada. So I will have to find other way to invest in the Canadian economy. That's what Nate and I do and other ITB managers. Of course, we are a for-profit organization. So we're going to look for the best return on investment on the money we spend to get offset credits, ITB credits. And to get those credits, not real money, credits against an obligation, we're going to look at mechanism under the policy that give us the best return. And those are mechanisms usually where you involve small and medium businesses and you do research and development. Those are the mechanism where the sweet spot is. And that's where we're going to look at you, SMB, coming to us and saying, we're working on developing this technology and we qualify as an SMB under the policy. And we would like to work with you because we believe, Carol, that in your product line, or Nate, you need software to detect targets. And that's what we do. Can we chat? That's where you get in. Telling us you're an SMB, telling us you're working on developing a product or a service, what it is, and how you think it fits in what we do as a business. Because my ex-manager used to say, do you get paid in bananas, Carol? And I'm like, no. He's like, yeah, because you're not a monkey. That meaning that I'm not writing checks to people to offset my problem, right? That would be easy. I'll just have to write the check, give you the check and say, do R&D. I don't want to know what you do. The sweet spot we're going to try to find, ITB managers, is that, oh my God, the tool, product, service you're developing might be of use to my company in its future growth, or might be used on one of my platforms. I might have sold a ship to Canada, but I'm selling submarines, airplane, tanks, munition. And you're coming to me saying, I know you do munition, and I have a new propellant technology that I want to R&D. Oh, let me sit with you and discuss. That's where you're going to get our sweet spot and us listening and being like, yes, I want to hear about that.
I mean, and that's unfortunately more often than not, sometimes a matter of luck. You have to know the company, but that right inflection point at the right time, at the right point in time, sometimes you just got to be lucky.
Yeah.
I would go to Walter's comment about direct versus indirect. Direct is defined as anything in direct relation or in direct support of a procurement, and indirect is anything that's not. So we have, Carol and I, in portfolio of obligations that we manage in Canada. Usually, well, there are some opportunities that stem from this. These opportunities that stem from this are when you are designing your bid solution. So my question to this, not question, my comment or suggestion is when you're looking at integrating a supplier supply chain on a direct procurement, on an opportunity, a bid and proposal that are developing right now, the importance is contacting them at the right time. So the earlier you do it, the better. And then aligning your technology, because sometimes the RFP is public and you can know enough about it to be able to dissect the different requirements, align it with the company's capabilities, and sometimes you see there's a gap, right? For example, CA, we don't do construction. Well, in a contract, I may have a construction scope, infrastructure scope, which may require some cyber capabilities, which may require different things. That's an opportunity for you to come in and say, "Hey, Nate, I know you're bidding on this, or you may be bidding on this. I don't know, but I offer this technology. Are you interested?" It's that tough nut to crack problem, right? If you identify that, then you're already one step ahead, and then it's aligning your pitch. Sorry. Once you've aligned that pitch, it's then aligning it with the ITB policy, identifying the right multiplier. And that's where we come in. Our business wants it because you solve a technological problem, either direct or indirect. And then we say, hey, okay, well, actually, there's a win-win-win, like as a saying, right? So you have a bit of budget, you can fund the R&D. The company, us, we profit from your deliverable in the sense that it increases or benefits our technology stack, which we can then use either on that procurement or on other procurements that we have, sometimes not even in Canada, doesn't matter. And then you invest in it, the company, and then there's the start of a relationship. Because once you started investing to create either that proof of concept or to create that that first little test case, after this, usually if it's successful, we want to buy the ensuing product. So then it's a procuring license fee that we buy, and then you're locked in.
And I know, Jeff, something that OEM asked you, I'm sure, was what's your Canadian content value? So that's another tip for people. Jeff, if you want to talk about the question you get maybe from, I'm sorry, I'm not the moderator, but you get from OEM when you meet with them is we usually ask, are you an SMB? What's your CCV?
Yeah, so yeah, for sure. And then we do get that every time we talk is, are you a Canadian company? How much content value do you have? We're 100% Canadian, so it's not an issue for us. But for companies that have foreign engagement in it, that's a very important thing to really understand for sure when you're having those conversations.
Yeah.
I actually wanted to pick up a little something on what both you and Nate were talking about. From an SMB perspective, time is actually one of the biggest challenges you have. We're working right now with a major defense prime, and the conversation started a decade ago, literally. The timing of when the opportunity arose, when the Canadian military were ready for the kind of things we were doing, took almost a decade to go from what we could have done then to what the military and the CAF were actually ready for. Timing is critical, but it was relationship building. We had to build those relationships over time, show up every event, reconnect, talk, follow up, have this kind of ongoing conversations so that when the timing was right, we were still top of mind for that to move forward. That is a critical thing for a small business. But it also means you can't rely upon that revenue as a small business. You have to have other things as a small business that are generating revenues. And this is where some of these dual use concepts come into play, in that what you're doing probably has a commercial civilian kind of application as well as a defense application. Wonderful. When the defense timing is right, that'll go forward. But in the meantime, you need to generate revenue off of your other business, that are there. So this idea of the long-term investment of time and money to become ready and appropriate when the timing shows up is a critical thing SMBs have to allow for. It's not going to be, I talk to you and, tomorrow I'm getting a business. It could be, in our case, in this particular one, a decade, literally between the first conversations and when we turned into business with them. So this is a critical thing that SMBs have to think about.
Yeah, the patience is definitely key. I want to get to some of the questions in the Q&A shortly, but to quick summary for the SMEs is what we said is know your role in your supply chain. You might not be a direct to the prime, you might be a sub-tier. Know your CCV. If you're talking to an ITB manager, know who they need to talk to in their organization for them to be champions for you. Tarek, how do you bridge that gap between your SME clients, SMB clients, and the ITB managers and the primes in your network, and then also translate that towards, drafting the transaction sheets that Camilla's eventually going to see?
Yeah, we take different strategies with different companies and different types of transactions as well. So, but I'm going to assume, most of the audience here are early stage companies that don't have existing relationships with primes or even eligible donors underneath their contract, because oftentimes it's not going to be the prime that's going to be your easiest pathway. It's going to be a major contractor to that prime that can also do ITB transactions that the prime will ultimately be able to capture off their obligations. Is understand your capabilities, your R&D, not just the R&D you're doing right now, but also your R&D potential. What can you be doing? Your Canadian content value, as you mentioned, but you can't actually know a real Canadian content value unless there's an actual transaction, but you can estimate your Canadian content value almost on like an estimated, value of a transaction. We have techniques for showing our clients that. Some companies that are software companies and they're all in Canada, their employees, it's going to be easier to figure out what that CCV is. But who you are, understand where you fit into defense supply chains, know who to talk to at those organizations, know what problem you truly solve, understand your competitive advantage, versus your competitors, because there could be 10 different other companies doing a similar service within your immediate geographic region. Forget all of Canada. So really be able to build a very strong business case. To Nathaniel's point, be very persistent, but walk that fine line of being persistent and not annoying. It's a very kind of fine line that you got to walk there. And then obviously there's pro tips. You can leverage people that already have those existing relationships with those primes, and you can lean on their credibility to kind of help you get into that door a little bit faster. So yeah, a lot of different ways. There's different schools of thoughts when it comes to ITBs. But Nathaniel, I saw you want to add something there.
Yeah, credibility is key. If you can talk, if you've done an ideas challenge, if you've been shortlisted on any other types of government, it would be, nothing speaks success as a past ideas winner. It really is a great
NATO grant, NATO Diana grant.
Yeah.
Mention it to us. We don't know. Say we just got a NATO.
Yeah.
We're taking you to the next stage of pitching to some technical people if you had those qualifications, because it means somebody more able than me and Nate to assess your technology has said this is great tech. So we're like, okay.
ISC military stream as well. So the ISC, Innovative Solutions Canada, has a military stream to do work, but that program also has a pathway to commercialization as well. So some really and there's some really interesting ways to kind of build your existing credibility and demonstrate to primes that you're ready and able to do business with them.
Yeah, sure. To that is it's one of these interesting barriers, right? Barriers to entry. To be able to get to the point at which you're able to work with a prime means your company has matured, your relationship has matured to the point at which you've done that. Once you have that first engagement with the prime, that also establishes huge credibility with other primes, because clearly you're at a level at which primes are willing to work with you. So it kind of, snowballs a little from there.
Yeah.
That's a barrier to entry for other organizations to get in as well. And so it's one of those, you have to do the work to get past that point, to get to the credibility level, and then you have a much easier ability to talk with primes at that point. But it also means your competition has still that barrier to get past to get into the marketplace. So if you're willing to make the investment to get past that whole barrier, it also prevents other companies from competing against you as effectively. So it's really kind of a benefit ultimately to go through it if you're willing to make that investment.
And you're right, Jeff. If I have like anything that will trigger me into thinking in 5 minutes, you're in for the next round of discussion with technology office or expert in my company, it's going to be you saying, I'm an SMB under the ITB policy definition. My Canadian content is high because engineering, labor, and materials are manufactured in Canada. I've had a NATO Diana grant, and I've already worked with Airbus on a small contract. I'm like, oh, that means they are a control good, they are ITAR, they are certified. You're going to be like, okay, want to work with you potentially. But I understand that me saying that might be discouraging people on this call, saying I don't have all those pedigree, or I'm just letting you know that's the perfect pitch. There are pitch that we still work with people that have never worked with a defense company, and they're going to start working with us. Don't worry. I'm just illustrating the best case scenario for an ITB manager falling in love with you at first sight.
Really,
Yeah,
well,
and to that,
it goes
no, go ahead, Jeff.
beyond. Sorry, it goes beyond things like controlled goods, because controlled goods is one of those requirements, but also security clearances.
Yes.
Did you have your NEO and Canadian security clearances, which we've got to go through, and so all those things provide okay, we don't have to worry about it from a prime perspective. The SME SMB is ready.
They know, yeah.
I'm going to interject there. For those who are curious about all the clearances and barriers to entry to that, I'll invite you to check out the other series of the webinar where we talked about how to get in through the door. We do need to get to the Q&A. There's a lot of questions, great questions in the chat. I'm not going to read them verbatim, but I think a lot of them are apropos with what we're discussing. When is the best time to engage with a contractor? Is it
Yesterday.
Once the contract is awarded and they have the obligations, or is it prior? And before we answer this, maybe
all the time at events, all the time. I remember, Jeff, meeting you at DefSec, I think 2 years ago, right? Yeah. And it might come to me that today someone is going to ask, do we have someone that does blah, blah? I'm going to be, oh, let me go in my database. Yeah, there is this work. But all the time that you can engage with primes at DefSec, CanSec, Western Innovation Forum, industry days, do it. And don't ask us 2 weeks later, have you made a decision? Say, hey, I met you at CanSec, I'm going to be at DefSec, I'll follow up with you. And we'll be like, great. And sometimes, as Jeff said, I've been in conversation with company for 4 years or 3 years before we finally did an offset, an ITB transaction, meaning we did business activity with them. Don't be discouraged. It's long. Sometimes it's shorter, but sometimes it's long. Just touch base with us. Be top of our mind. We don't forget you.
Let's get into those mechanics a bit, though, because in your case, Carol, you're saying you had obligations and he stays top of mind, and then you have possible transactions to do with them. But when a prime is bidding on a Canadian procurement contract, their bid is going to be evaluated. D&D is going to evaluate the technical, whether it meets their requirements. I'm going with the old model with PSPC having been the one that would evaluate the cost, and ISET, or now DIA, is going to evaluate that value proposition. And you guys being the primes have a requirement in your proposal to at least put forth an offset plan on how you're going to meet those obligations. You don't have, you have to have a plan for the first 3, 5, 10 years. You don't have to have them all set out in the beginning. But if I'm an SME and I want to be part of that value proposition when you're bidding, how do I do that? Or maybe, Camilla, you can talk about how you guys evaluate those versus companies meeting their obligations once they've already won the contracts.
For sure. I mean, on the evaluation side, something that makes the bid phase a little easier in some senses is we have something called the ITB Bank, which is essentially it's a team with a group where large primes such as BAE, CAE, where Carol and Nate are coming from, can submit transactions and activities that they're undertaking in Canada, even without a contract in hand or an obligation in hand. So they can submit activities to us, we assess them for eligibility, we say yes, good to go, and they can claim those credits and put them into a bank that they can then apply to any procurement over the next 10 years. So at the bid phase, I would say a big chunk of what we're evaluating, not necessarily evaluating because they've already been evaluated, but is planned activities or ITB bank transactions that de-risk a lot of what the prime is going into by signing up for an ITB obligation. So there's a little bit of we've already assessed these transactions, and then there's a little bit of, okay, you know what the procurement involves as BAE, CAE, and you know what your company can do in-house to perform that contract. You know who your major suppliers are. So there's a little bit of you already know how part of the contract will be satisfied in terms of that ITB obligation. And then there's a lot of the de-risking through the ITB bank of those larger indirect transactions for the most part. When it comes to evaluating a transaction day to day, we do have timing requirements. So for a company that maybe doesn't hold a lot of ITB obligations or is just signing a contract for the first time with an ITB obligation, they might not have that ITB bank ready to go or that fulsome plan of how they're going to meet their obligation for the next 20 years. They might have only started with their first 3 years. And so we're assessing, are you undertaking this activity during the time frame of the contract? Which also includes all of the prep time from when we, as Canada, announce a procurement. So a request for information on a concept or a proposed procurement that's going to come down the line in 5 to 10 years. All of that prep time is included within that timing requirement. So companies can start undertaking business activities right from the get-go of, okay, there's a concept, there's a procurement coming down the line, and I think I can do that. I can start making transactions, making business activities in Canada that will go towards that potential ITB obligation. So that's what I'm looking at in terms of the timing and evaluation side.
The
And I
right,
Are
think,
you guys
yeah.
involved at the bidding phase, or are you only trying to meet those obligations after your companies have won the contract?
no, because garbage in, garbage out. If we have a sucky, sorry for the language, solution that is all foreign based, I'm increasing my risk down the line. So our job as ITB managers is to push the business to go Canadian as much as they can, which is not oftentimes the path of least resistance. So we are at odds with our solution managers to convince them to not only send RFQs to some local company that they already know and done business with that are non-Canadian, but also send them and have them assess Canadian technologies and Canadian suppliers as alternatives, and because they might be surprised. So there's a lot of upfront work that's done, and I would say for the people listening to us, that is the inflection point you need to get on. You can look at this from a timing perspective. I would start at the RFP issuance date. Oftentimes on buy and sell or Canada buys, you have a date of when the RFP is going to be issued, and try to interact with the primes at least 3 to 4 years in advance, because that's when the solution is being drawn up. By the time the draft RFP and the RFP hits the street, the solution is baked. It's done.
Yeah, I would say, Nate, talking of like TKMS, if you guys are waking up now to write an email to TKMS ITB manager, the day Mr. McCartney announced that procurement, the submarine procurement to that company, I'm pretty sure this guy had hundreds of emails coming in his LinkedIn. I personally don't check my LinkedIn anymore because I have my emails, I have CanSec, I have DefSec. If on top of that I respond to all LinkedIn invitation, I don't work anymore. I just work on reading people trying to get in the door, which is your job, and I fully understand, but be mindful of that. Engaging early before the solution is decided. It's not a contract award, but you can continue to engage because that submarine, that boat, that is not built yet. It's not finalized 100%. And those bidders or those people winning contracts have international business where they might need you. So don't worry. We might not need you on the program we won. We might need you on a program we're selling somewhere else in the world.
We're going to have to wrap up, but we still have lots of great questions. I'll invite you guys to stay if you can for a bit longer, but I'll hand it back to Jen for some closing remarks, and we'll keep answering as many questions as we can.
Thank you so much, Walter. What an outstanding panel today. Before I bring this session to a close, and I want to point out that we will stay on for as long as we will have people in the room to continue to answer questions, but I want to be mindful of time and just offer a few things. I want to balance the complexity in working with defense and primes and offer some inspiration. so that you don't feel all overwhelmed when you leave this webinar. The bottom line is we need sovereign capabilities, and especially when it comes to innovation and technology. And we need you, is the clear message that we are hearing from our government and from defense. And they are behind you while trying to figure out the complexities of engaging with your companies. There's no doubt about it. Investing in defense might be a long-term game, but you would do it because you will be contributing to Canada's sovereignty. And provided that have a great solution, you'll do extremely well. And from my own personal standpoint, working with those who look after our safety every day is incredibly inspiring. I mean, they have a duty to protect us, so we have a duty to serve them in any way that we can. So that brings us to the end of our session today. So on behalf of Digital and Strix, and thank you for all of us for joining us in this Inside the Prime Ecosystem webinar. Want to again thank our panelists. You were absolutely fabulous, Camilla, Carol, Jeff, Derek, Nate, and Walter. Some practical notes before we wrap up. So a few quick things before we go. So over the next couple of days, everyone who registered will receive a follow-up email with the recording of today's session and the slides that we shared, along with a link to the series page where you'll find the earlier sessions, the resources we've collected so far as well. So that page is also where the next session will be announced. So keep an eye out in your inbox. So we were not able to cover all of the questions today. We will try to do that after like the top of the hour. But if there's something that we didn't reach, please contact us directly. One of our key lead on the digital side who was with us today is Artyom Mazviev. He's a senior innovation strategist and dual use lead. And there's also Walter Chan at Strix. So please reach out. They will be glad to help you navigate. And I know there's a lot of questions in this chat about call Carol, can I call Nate? And so we'll get all of that sorted out. On that, we are at the top of the hour. Thank you. Merci, everyone. Goodbye. And for those who want to stay on, we'll be glad to stay on, and Walter will continue. Thank you.
Thanks for all those who joined and who have to leave. Yeah, great panel.
Sorry, Walter. I do have to leave. Unfortunately, I have another presentation, but I just want to say I am available for any questions. I'm not as busy as an ITB manager or somebody from the government, so feel free to shoot a message to me on LinkedIn. I'll answer your questions at a high level. Thanks, everyone. It's super happy to see the excitement for joining Canada's defense sector and our the ITB policy as well. So take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Eric. Thanks for joining.
Pleasure.
So yeah, there's a lot of questions in here. A lot of them can be answered directly because they're just quick policy questions. So I won't cover those. And like I said, I won't go verbatim. I'm kind of trying to get a feel of the questions. I think we should touch a bit more on the modernization that Camilla had in her opening remarks. With the modernization, have you guys as primes, Carol and Nate, seen an increase in potential transactions, or maybe Jeff, have you seen a new opportunity to engage in business because of these modernization policies, such as, I don't know, a 2x on the direct or strategic investment, for instance?
It's too early, I would say. So the ITB modernization were released 30th of May at CanSec. We just told you that it takes months and years to do a transaction. So you're not going to see, it's like, take 2 aspirin and don't tell me you still have a headache. Take 2 aspirin, and in the upcoming months, you're going to see that shift where I'm training my procurement teams on defense program they're bidding on to say, if you select a Canadian SMB to do the work on that program, we get a double multiplier on the credits. Start looking at potential switch from a non-Canadian supplier to a Canadian small, medium business. We're just starting that conversation. So yes, we're looking at those modernization great tools that are great for SMB, but don't expect the outcome to be like this week. It's like just doesn't work with the rhythm of the defense procurements in general, and ITBs in general. But don't be discouraged. It's good change for SMB, but it's not going to happen that fast. I wish, but.
especially
And
on
I'll
the
be
direct.
very curious to see how those impacts and how that really rolls out. I will just add as well, since it was only announced at the end of May and introduced at the end of May, it does only apply to new procurements. So many of our procurements take quite a while to develop the technical requirements, the economic benefits requirements, the contracting, competition, evaluation of bids. So while we introduced it at the end of May, it hasn't yet been applied to a new procurement. It's in the process of being applied to new procurements, but it's still very fresh.
Nor has it been applied to existing procurements where the T's and C's are the 5.7 or older versions, which is maybe a point for you. I said, if I don't know what the stress test is to modernize these existing T's and C's on existing programs, but the carrots and incentives are in 6.0, the new T's and C's that were released, would very much be a desirable feature on our existing contracts, as they would help us make new supply chain decisions on those existing contracts towards Canadian industry. So I have a few of mine in my portfolio as well that I'll have discussions with the operational team very soon.
For sure. And I do remember having those conversations with you and Carol. So we hear you and we definitely get it. Yeah.
Can you elaborate a bit on that 70% CCV?
Yes. I think Camilla is the best position, no? And then we'll talk from an ITB manager point of view.
For sure. So previously under the ITB policy, we did have certain boosts available under the policy that required a minimum Canadian content value of 70% or over to benefit from those boosts. Essentially, Canadian content value is the measurement of how much of your product or service is Canadian in origin. Again, could be Canadian labor, Canadian materials, profit taxable in Canada. It excludes things like wages paid to foreign nationals, foreign material that is imported into Canada to be put on a product, all of these different things. So it's the piece of your product that is Canadian in origin. So what we're looking for here is, we might have a company that meets our Canadian company definition. They're incorporated in Canada pursuant to the laws here, but they are mostly foreign material, foreign products. They're a distributor of foreign products. That isn't quite what we're looking for when we're trying to incentivize that movement of work into Canada and that use of a Canadian supplier in a global company's supply chain. So the Canadian content value measure is really to focus on how much of Canadian benefit is really available in that product or service, and that's being added when a company decides to change their supplier relationships and move into Canada. So that's what we're looking for, and we want to incentivize that movement of work to Canada, but also recognize and provide additional benefit where a company is making that distinct choice to move work into Canada. So we'll boost it to 100%, which is essentially just, instead of getting 70% credit on a $1 million transaction, you will get $1 million in credit towards your ITB obligation. And if it's a small, medium business, that $1 million will be multiplied by 2. So that's where we're trying to see that incentive. And it, as Carol said, it will take some time, but that's really the directive and objective there.
And it's okay if you don't have more than 70%, guys. Just be honest with us and say, my CCV is 60%, because unfortunately, the machine I'm building, the equipment I'm building has this and this parts in it that come from outside of Canada, cannot be sourced in Canada. So I'm 60% Canadian content. It's information for us. Of course, if you have more than 70, we're even more happy, but there is no point lying. Those numbers get verified for us to get the credits, and it's not going to disqualify you from me and Nate looking at you. It's just, we just need that information. It's valuable info. If you're above 70, we're more than happy to hear that. Okay.
But if you're at 60 and there's easy wins for you to get to 70, do explore that, because the added incentive of being 70 and above is appealing to us ITB managers, especially if it's the question of sourcing steel from a US vendor versus a Canadian one where the difference in price is minimal to negligible. Then that you have to do the pros and cons and the trade-off analysis, but in some cases it's worth it. I'll just add something real quick on this CCV. Look at CCV as a unit of measure, like Bitcoins. It is monopoly money. It is a measure of maple syrupness. But how do we get there? It's a question I often get is how far down do you go? If I buy a hammer at Home Depot, is it 100% CCV? No, because Home Depot buys it from somewhere else that's not Canada, most likely. So the example I give often is take one aircraft. If the aircraft, let's say if a Bombardier aircraft, the Global Express, Canada buys one. Well, you have to decompose the aircraft. And let's say the engines are from Pratt & Whitney on the South Shore. Yeah, they're Canadian, they're a tier one, but the fan blades are titanium and that's sourced from China. So the engines themselves has a CCV. And so you can go down usually minimum two levels in order to calculate the CCV. So my main message to the audience is if you have Canadian vendors or you're sourcing from Canada, it doesn't mean that's 100% CCV of that part. Go one level further and see, okay, well, you buy transformed steel. Okay, who does your transformer buy it from? Is it a Canadian foundry or is it a US foundry or somewhere else? And then if you do get that, then that's good enough and you can assign what I do 100% CCV to that if that's the case.
Do some due diligence, but don't be more Catholic than the Pope.
Yeah.
Right? Like I buy my steel from Arcelor. Yeah, but do they produce it here or no? Oh, okay, all good. You don't have to then say, but to do the steel, where did they buy the sand? And where did, no. Like calm down, right?
A couple of questions about clearances and accreditations. Again, I'll invite you to check out the previous webinars. Some questions about intellectual property. Stay tuned for that. Digital is going to host a webinar related to IP protection. You guys had talked earlier about credibility and, having gone through an ISC, having gone through ideas, having a NATO Diana contract. Does having done business with another foreign country add credibility for you, would you say?
Absolutely.
100%.
Okay.
I want to go back on IP for a sec, not on who owns the IP. I'm letting it out there. A lot of us ITB managers don't know the IP that our company owns. Like it's too big for us to know. You might know as an SMB that BAE did a patent, CAE, Lockheed did something. Never be shy to ask us, could I get it from my own use? I'm going to give you an example. BAE is just in defense. If you want a methane sensor detector to do oil and gas leaks detection, I don't care, but I will care to potentially give you this tech. So I get ITB credits because you're not competing with me. I don't do oil and gas. So if you're aware of our companies potentially having some IP patent use case that you would want to use for developing your tech, and it's not going to be competing with us, we might be very open to discuss it. And you know better. I've had people say, oh, Carol, did you know you have a wind tunnel facility in the UK to test my drone? And I was like, I didn't know. Thank you for telling me. Let's see what we can do with that. So, because we don't know everything, it's impossible, right? I've worked at SMB where I took executive decision, meaning I knew everyone. We're 5 people. But when you're 1,000 employee, 10,000 employee, you don't know what the others are doing, the other entity in the world are doing. So come to us if you have an IP, in-kind request, a software request. We might say yes. You have nothing to lose. Worst case, we say no.
I'm glad you brought that up because we didn't talk too much about that on the panel. I know we talked a lot about the directs. We kind of got into the indirects, but exactly there, licensing some IP you have has a very attractive multiplier, a 9 multiplier. And if it's not in competition with you, I think you'd definitely be willing to share that. And that's a way in the door for a lot of SMEs that might be able to enhance their products by using that IP.
So an investment can be a cash investment. It can be an in-kind investment. We're open to listen to people that say, you have engineers that we don't have doing those type of measurement. Can you lend them to us to review our document or a case study or R&D test? So it can be in-kind labor. It can be licenses, software that we have, or cash. Tell us what you want. Again, we might say no. That's the worst that's going to happen to you. Carol, I want cash. Carol, I want your IP. Yes, no. We'll investigate.
There is also a rarely used one, which is an ITB equity investment.
BC, we didn't talk about that either.
Yeah, okay, sure.
So from a prime perspective, when would you consider an equity investment into an SMB?
There's two types. If you want to start with the VC, and I'll do a future sales.
Sure.
I think it depends on the company alignment with the strategy and the SMB being interested or not in equity funding, right? You might say, I don't want to give any equity of my company to get something, but that's always, again, up for discussion. Will the prime want to say, yes, I want to acquire share in your company? Be mindful, acquiring more than 50%, so a majority stake usually doesn't get you ITB credit. So it would be a minority stake. And that involves a lot more paperwork, M&A, reviews, due diligence, on top of the offset due diligence. So, but everything is on the table. Don't be restricted by what you think is the ITB policy. Let me, Nate, and those specialists look at that. Tell us your dream. This is my dream. And we're going to tell you, that could work, or no, because of this reason. Don't become the expert in that. Your expertise is the quality of your product and your service and the dream you have on how you would want to work with us. Okay. And then we come and we crush it. No, but don't limit what you want to do. We're going to tell you, oh, unfortunately, we cannot do that, but thank you for bringing it up. Or, oh, I've never done it. Let me look at it. Okay.
I'm seeing a number of primes now creating venture groups to
Yes.
pursue the pathway. And so this is, although it's been in the ITB policy for a long time, it seems to be more recent that this is kind of manifesting as actual.
It's cyclic, Jeff.
Yeah, you're on point. We did a venture capital transaction 2 weeks ago. So yes, it's something that we're looking at as one of the tool, and it's not because defense OEM want to use that policy tool. It's because the entire market understand there is money to be made in defense, and therefore venture capitalists are now being interested in investing in Canadian startup that have defense product, where before defense was dirty. So no one wanted to say, I have in my portfolio Marlboro tobacco, I have defense, and I have oil and gas, right? No one wanted to to say they're funding those activity. Now it became acceptable because our government and countries are upping their defense spend. So the public is more open to that. Venture capitalists, so the opportunity to say now we can fund defense, and therefore ITB managers are going to follow that market trend and say, yes, now we can maybe also invest that way in the market.
Well,
Great segue. Sorry, Jeff. I want to, in the interest of time, we're going to have to wrap up soon. That's a great segue. I didn't want to get into future sales transactions and DC in too much detail because that's more appealing to the primes. And I think if you're an SME and you're already thinking about that, you're ahead of the game. I see a great question here that I think is a great way to wrap it up. A lot of what we're talking about is like pitching your company to a venture capitalist if you're looking for seed funding, for instance, because the conversation you're having with an ITB manager has a lot of parallels with what you're doing to try and get investment if you're a small business. What are some things that are very defense specific that would be different from just talking to a potential investor? Something to help people in the crowd who are, we saw the stats at the beginning of the webinar, something that could apply to them that they might not know if they're new to the defense market or haven't even gotten in yet.
So from a small business perspective, take opportunities to go to conferences, to meet with people in the armed forces, whether they're Canadian or foreign military forces, and talk to them about what their actual business challenges are. Historically, this has been a bit of a problem because there was really I can't talk to you, I can't influence it. But that has changed dramatically over the last year to the point at which the Canadian Armed Forces in particular are looking to partner. They're looking to actually work with industry to make sure that what industry is developing meets their actual operational needs, not some sanitized version of that. And so that's a first stage to me, is really understand what the actual business challenges that the armed forces are having, so that when you are talking to primes, you can talk about, here's the information I have that validates that what I'm doing is actually of interest.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've actually, heard of companies not wanting to demo their tech to the Canadian Armed Forces because they didn't want to make themselves ineligible to bid when the procurement comes out. And that's a paradigm shift. The whole
It's
paradigm shift
totally
we
changed.
can get
Exactly.
into, but we could talk about that for hours. We will have to wrap it up though. I'll hand it back to Jen for some closing remarks, but I want to extend my gratitude and thanks to everyone in the panel. You guys did a great job, and I really hope our audience got something out of it.
Thank you, Walter. Thank you, panelists. I love the last word that you used, which is, yeah, there's a huge paradigm shift. And I hope you get inspired by that. For the first time, I've been advising, started my career in the Canadian Armed Forces and then advised defense organizations around the world for 30 years. It is the first time that I see things being the way that they are, and it offers sort of a lot of inspiration for the path forward. And there was a one of question in the room because here we are, all digital companies. You know how fast things are moving. I mean, literally week by week, day by day, especially when we refer to things as AI. And one of the questions in the chat was, I mean, there's no time. Like, this is not going to happen. Like, we're going to, we got to, sort of fail fast and grow fast. And I can't necessarily offer anything that's specific in nature other than maybe a level of inspiration around. I think our government really understands that, and there are numerous different uh, innovation systems that are being put in play and things to kind of get around that. And for us, you digital companies, I think the future looks really bright. And so I hope you really enjoyed this series. Again, it will be available for you to look at the recording, and we encourage you to reach out to anybody that was on the panel today. On that, thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful day.
Merci. Bye.
Merci.
Thank you so much.